of anxiety.
Yes, anxiety is something a lot of young people are dealing with today, especially after the pandemic. Author and clinical psychologist Sonali Gupta will help us unpack how anxiety is affecting young adults, and more importantly, how parents and educators can help.
Sonali Gupta is an author and practicing clinical psychologist with over 16 years of experience. Today, from 4 to 4:15, we will also be having a book signing event by her. She specializes in anxiety, emotional well-being, and mental health with a focus on helping individuals navigate the complexities of modern life.
Sonali is the author and is an au- Sonali is the author of Anxiety, Overcome It and Live Without Fear, and the work offers practical strategies for managing anxiety and building resilience. She is a sought-after speaker and mental health advocate, regularly contributing to conversations on emotional wellness in India.
I don't know about you, Lujen, but I could definitely use some advice in that department.
Same here. Let's give a warm welcome to Sonali Gupta, and this session runs for around 35 minutes.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for the warm introduction. I'm Sonali. Let me begin by asking everyone a question. Do you know anyone in your life or you who has never experienced anxiety? Show of hands. Do you know anyone? I worked 20 years as a psychotherapist, and it's one of the biggest myths where some people will tell me, oh, I experience anxiety, but there are some people who will never feel anxious. There's nobody out there who doesn't experience anxiety. All of us, everyone present here, experiences anxiety to a different degree. For some of us, I remember ever since I was 5 or 6, I experienced anxiety. I didn't have the vocabulary for it. When I was 23, I realized my anxiety was like low-grade fever. Like 99, when you have 99 fever, you feel anxious, but you live with it. So I lived with it till the time, I became a psychotherapist, and I was like, oh, I've always had anxiety. I just learned to work around it. One of the biggest myths also is only when things go wrong do we experience anxiety. Tell me, is that true? When things go right, give me example of, can we pass the mic? Yes, please.
Like I went to the Malayaditi science.
You went to the?
The Malayaditi science competition.
Yes.
So like though it went right, I felt like very scared because there were like 99 other people who also participated. Even though mine went like kind of right, I didn't win anything, so I kind of felt anxious about my result.
Thank you. What's your name? May I know your name?
Harman.
Harman. Thank you, Harman. A big round of applause for Harman for sharing, beginning the conversation. Even as Harman shared, even if you are at a competition, you're selected, we all have butterflies. Just before coming here, I was thinking, okay, what time will the session start? There are always those butterflies. People in this room have gotten married, had children. Were they all positive events? Not really, right? A marriage, having kids, even getting a promotion, even events which feel positive can evoke anxiety in us, no matter how old we are. So in the pandemic specifically, I used to have a 5-year-old who would come, it was all online sessions, who would talk about, I can't go off to sleep at all. I have to toss and turn for about 4 hours before I get to sleep. And, anxiety can show up in ways like not being able to sleep. To the oldest client that I work is about 82, and the client struggles with panic attacks. And, I have consent, so I'm going to share this story without too many details. The client told me, I asked the client, when the client came in for the first session, I work out of a cottage space in Bombay. The room is very tiny, and if you know Bombay, the property prices are very high, so are rental prices. So the room is really tiny, not one of those huge rooms. The client comes in and says, I can't do a session. I'm going to have a panic attack right here. So I said, okay, since I am the one who didn't tell you that this room is small, you have a choice to leave. The client tells me, are you okay with the AC switched on, we leave the room open? I said, yes, we keep the door open. And then I asked the client, when was the first time you remember feeling anxious? The client is 83, tells me when I was 6 years old. And I said, have you worked through it? Have you done anything about it? Said never. I didn't even know it was anxiety till about 5 years back. And it's only now when a psychiatrist, found I was struggling with panic attacks, suggested that I work around it. So today in the session, I'm going to do a focus on a couple of things and maybe leave the last 15, 20 minutes for all of you to ask questions. One, what anxiety looks like. Second is a focus on what leads to us feeling anxious. And third is about how does one build a toolkit for anxiety. Whether you're a parent, whether you're an educator. How many educators, librarians in the room? Tell me. Thank you. And parents, how many parents do we have? All right. And then we have, young adults here. So I'll work around, yes, thank you. I'll work around all three of them. Firstly, words. When people come in for sessions, people don't say they are struggling with anxiety, maybe more so now. 20 years back when I started, even before the pandemic, I am feeling overwhelmed. How many people here have felt overwhelmed? A lot of us, right? Second, people would say, I am feeling wired and tired. Felt wired and tired? Third, people would say, I'm stressed. And when I ask, what is stress? It boils down to anxiety. Then people saying, I'm not centered. There are 1,000 thoughts running in my head, feeling like it's a podcast going in my head. Do some of you feel that you have 10 tabs open at any given time in your head? Anybody here? Thank you for sharing. A lot of us, would feel that, and maybe we have felt that for the longest time. And here's what I want to tell everyone here. Anxiety doesn't go away. So if you have come here believing you will listen to me or read the book on anxiety and it will go away, that's not how it's going to work. Anxiety only can be managed. I have worked, it felt like low-grade fever. Now it doesn't feel like low-grade fever. Do I still get anxious? Of course, I still get anxious. I'll still catastrophize, think of worst-case scenarios. So I'll still reach airport much, much before than what I should. So there is still that bit, but anxiety doesn't go away. We only manage it. How does anxiety show up for children? One of my first clients I worked with, every time the child was a 7-year-old, just 2 to 5 days before the exam would start throwing up, stomach ache, saying, something is happening, I don't know what is happening. And, we are talking back in 2005-04 when I started working. There wasn't a vocabulary. The parent got the child because the child had fainted at school, just before the exam. And the teacher said, maybe there's something psychosomatic. Another way anxiety shows up now, more commonly than what we hear, panic attacks or anxiety attacks. When panic attacks, anxiety attacks happen, it feels like the world is falling apart. Your heart is beating really fast. There are palpitations that you would have. You also are thinking about worst case scenario. So a 15-year-old who was writing their exams said that I start thinking that I'll blank out in my exam. I won't be able to remember anything. And just that thought leads my heart to beating so fast that I can't sit still. I feel like I'll throw up. I feel like I need to run away. I don't know what to do about it. Also, it may show up in adults. Panic attacks is something that any of us here can have. Sometimes they have a clear trigger. The other times, they can just happen without you realizing at the end of the day that you're having a panic attack or an anxiety attack. Also, let me separate how it shows up for children, for adults, and then maybe deep dive more. For children, it will also show up in they feeling restless. Children, for my daughter specifically, when she's anxious, she's 15 now, but when she's feeling anxious, she ends up just crying. She cannot say anything. She doesn't even know what's happening a lot of times. She will say, now lesser, 15-year-old has a far evolved vocabulary. As a child, anxiety would show up in tears, saying, I don't know what is happening to me. It also shows up, in anger, irritation. Remember, when our children are feeling rage, rage is a feeling of powerlessness and helplessness. Rage is not a feeling of they being against you. And anger is a feeling of injustice. Rage is a feeling, I am feeling powerless, I am feeling helpless, and I don't know what to do. And if you have ever experienced anxiety, does it make you feel helpless? For anyone, show of hands, do you feel helpless when you're feeling anxious? It's a massive feeling of helplessness. Also, with adults or children, there are 4 ways your anxiety can show up physically. Headaches, which is really, really common, where adults will talk about how they get massive headaches just before a presentation, after a good presentation is done. Gut issues, irritable bowel syndrome, IBS, what we talk about, constipation, and then diarrhea or a feeling that you need to use the loo immediately. So headaches, then gut issues. The third is stomach aches, the most common when it comes to children, but also with adults. Then backache, lower back pain. There are wonderful books written around how do you manage back pain, lower back pain, which is anxiety-induced. And the last is around skin. So quite a few of my referrals come from dermatologists, where the dermatologists talk about what's known as urticaria, where you have a reddish patch largely on your hands, sometimes on your thighs, other parts. No matter how many medications the psychiatrist or the dermat is giving, that patch doesn't go away. And as a result, they are referred to in therapy because it's psychosomatic. By psychosomatic, I mean what's happening in your mind is impacting it's showing up in the form of bodily symptoms. Also, if you have experienced anxiety, you would know there is brain fog. It just feels there's no clarity at all, inability to concentrate, inability to attend. Yes? And then there are other times that anxiety can show up in the form of avoidance. So, how many of you have thought about, there's a performance happening, you have to go on stage, do a presentation, and think maybe I should not go because I'll goof up? Have you had thoughts of avoidance? Thank you for sharing. For those, who may have never experienced, that's one of the common symptoms that people show up for. So, one of these this was a person on a board of director, who was a board of director. He was 70 years old, and he said that for over the years, whenever there's a big presentation, whenever I'm supposed to go for these meetings, I in my head, play the scenario some 100 times thinking how it will happen. I keep playing it, I keep replaying it, thinking what will happen, how exactly it will work out. Anxiety is a form of we trying to find control, where everything is under control, which is not how life happens. If you are an adult, you know that that's not how life happens. So it may show and play in you replaying many scenarios. Anxiety is a feeling of nervousness. It's also a feeling of second-guessing yourself, where you're constantly thinking, what I'm doing, is that right? So in the age of technology, it shows up with people telling me, oh, I've sent a message, I've sent an email, and I don't know if I oversaid something, did I overshare? Somebody has not responded to me, so I don't know how they have perceived my message. So in the age of social media, it also shows up in those ways. Thirdly, anxiety finds a way in catastrophizing. By catastrophizing, we mean thinking about worst case scenarios. So for example, if you have a flight lined up, or if you have a doctor's checkup, there are times where people will talk about how their mind has just gone to what can go wrong there, rather than a focus on what's going right or on the facts. And they will have many, thoughts which are running in their head continuously when it comes to anxiety there. I was speaking to someone and they were asking me, what do you think is the biggest reason for anxiety now? And is it only that this generation struggles with anxiety? I think anxiety has been around for years. It's something normal. So if you have a presentation here, if you're going to come and speak here, some amount of anxiety is not bad at all, right? There are so many scenarios if you're writing, and we have so many well-accomplished, writers, authors in the room. Anxiety is good. It allows us to do our research well. It allows us to prep well. Even before an exam, some amount of healthy anxiety is good. When your anxiety is much higher than what's required, when the frequency of it is very high, and when the intensity of the anxiety is very high, is when it requires attention. Not all forms of anxiety require attention. So let's say with childbirth or with marriage, because there's so many things happening, your life is going to change, it doesn't always require attention. Also, and someone asked me this, just some minutes back, so I'm bringing this. They were telling me about, how when they lost their pet, they experienced massive anxiety. They just felt scared for the life of everyone, and they were scared to have a new pet. So one of the common things that happen when we struggle with grief is that we begin to fear for the life of everyone around us, and our grief can evoke our anxiety. My second book is called You Will Be All Right, A Guide to Navigating Grief. In that I talk about whether it's the loss of whether it's a loss of a pet or even loss of our favorite bookstore, loss of all places we related to, our friends shifting to a different town. They can all also evoke anxiety in us at the end of the day. Also, given how much we all are spending time on our devices, people have started using cell phone screens to distract themselves, to also connect more with devices and connect less with other people around. So one of the big sources of anxiety is, we're not interacting with others much. We're not interacting, spending time in nature. We are spending a lot of time in our own heads, on our devices, rather than being surrounded by others. Also, if you live in a city like Bombay, Bangalore, the traffic, the way our work is, I don't know how much socially we are going out and meeting each other. So one of the antidotes to anxiety is social connection, your ability to meet others, connect with others, which is coming down massively at the end of the day. And that's a huge, huge factor which comes in the way when it comes to anxiety. So let's move into the biggest chunk. How do you build a toolkit for yourself, whether you are an adult, whether you are an educator, whether you are a child? So let's begin with panic attacks. If you know someone who's having a panic attack, has had a panic attack, or you yourself have had it, here are 3 to 4 things that you can do. The first is ask them how do they want to be helped, or do they even want to be helped. I have a client I work with. The client is 38. The client doesn't want anybody in the room when the client is having a panic attack, not even a family member. The second thing is ask them, do they want to be hugged, helped, or heard? Some people only want to be heard. Some people need a hug, need touch. There are other people who actually need help. So ask helped, hugged, or heard. Also, the same rule actually applies. When I do couples work, one of the common things that couples will tell me, my partner jumps to giving me a solution when all I needed was hug, or all I needed was to talk about what's happening. So ask, do you need to be hugged, helped, or heard? The third thing which works beautifully within seconds, minutes in a panic attack, which you can do, is take ice cubes and hold them, in your hands, make a fist out of it, open it, close it. So when you're having a panic attack, you find if there is a history of panic attacks, you should be seeing a psychiatrist. I am talking from a standpoint of if you're not seeing a psychiatrist, you've not been able to deal with it, it has happened suddenly, take ice cubes, make a fist, open it, close it. Open it, close it. If you're out in a meeting and you happen to have a panic attack, sit down, have cold water, sip it very, very gradually. Everything that I'm seeing here, I don't know the intensity and frequency for a lot of you when it comes to panic attack. So please consult with a therapist, with a psychiatrist before you do any of this. But this is something that really works. Also, another thing is to take an ice pack and a lot of us will have ice pack at home, and put it on the nape of your neck. And if you're feeling very wired, if you're also feeling that the thoughts are just going on, there's a pattern of ruminative thinking, putting the ice pack on either side, doesn't matter, for just about 5 minutes happens to cool down the system. And the same applies when in meetings, whatever work you do. If you have access to none of it, go to the washroom and splash cold water on your face. And that's something that works beautifully at the end of the day. And in most cases, if there is a history of panic attacks, by history I mean you seem to have it regularly in a week, it's been happening for months, it's a good idea to consult a psychiatrist. To people who have missed flights, who have been asked to get off flights because of their anxiety, a good idea to see a psychiatrist. Also, if the anxiety feels like, it's taking charge and you cannot do anything and you don't have resources, you could do some of this. The other technique which I tell parents, educators, libraries is, working with the child to teach them, or even as an adult, learning self-soothing. Self-soothing is it's a superpower all of us in the room already have. You may not know the name for it, but you have engaged in self-soothing. And using the phone, scrolling through Instagram, scrolling through social media is not self-soothing. You are distracting, you're numbing yourself. Numbing yourself doesn't ever help in the long run. It only helps in the short run, and it comes to impact you. Self-soothing is something which requires we engaging in activities that seem to calm us down. I understood about it for the first time when the power of it, when my daughter was about 3 years old, 3.5, 4 years. She had, kids were running in the corridors and she fell down because somebody accidentally pushed her. When she came home, she was crying a lot. The tears wouldn't stop. So I asked her, what can I do to make it better for you? And she said, make me noodles and I will feel good. So for her, food seemed to be a way to soothe herself. Then I said, what can you do to make yourself feel better? She said, just give me colors. And, she took the colors, and till the time noodles were made, which I did make, she was fine. She had found the soothing with colors. She had found a way to soothe herself. Ask yourself what works for your self-soothing. I often use walking as a way to self-soothe myself. So if I do a brisk walk of 30 to 40 minutes, even 20 minutes, it calms me down. So ask yourself, is it walking? Is it dance? Is it art? Is it books? Books are a beautiful way to calm ourselves, to reading picture books, other books, which work in a way to manage our anxiety. Also listening to music. And if any of you have teenagers, are your kids teenagers in that age group? Thank you. So if you have teenagers and they listen, they get their music, let's say on Spotify, they have playlists for every mood. I don't know a single child who I've worked with who doesn't have a playlist. They have a playlist for that they play after school. They have a playlist for on days they are feeling low. They have a playlist for when nothing makes sense. And it's just amazing speaking to them, how much they will tell you about how they've curated their music. They already know self-soothing works. With everyone who has teenagers or even young kids, the worst time to talk to your child is when they have just come back from school. They are tired, they are overwhelmed. That's not the time for you to talk to them. The best time to talk to them is when they have found a space to cool down, to decompress themselves. Although if you ask kids, when I work with kids and I ask them, their best time is at 10, 11 in the night when you are tired as an adult and you want to sleep. And they are like, that time, and it's interesting how they have calmed down. They also know if at 10:30, 11 in the night they come and tell you something, you're too tired to scold them for more than 5-10 minutes. You'll say, okay, we'll deal with it tomorrow morning, right? So begin to figure as a parent, if your child also struggles with anxiety, when to have conversations, when not to have conversations, because you're overwhelming. When a child comes back at 3:34, what do they say? How was school? Good. Did you eat your lunch? Yes. How did everything go? Well. And they're done. They don't want any conversation around it. The other technique, linked to self-soothing is social soothing. So for those of you, anyone here has pets? Dogs, cats, tortoise? Yes. Do your pets make you feel better when you play with them? Social soothing, whether it's with, whether it's with your, pets, whether even some kids, all they want is a hug from you, your presence in the room. Identify when do you need to dip into social soothing at the end of the day. The next big one, when I, about 10 years back, was struggling with, I felt I was struggling with burnout. For me, it showed up in the way of feeling a lot of fatigue. I felt extreme fatigue at that point. I realized while I lead a super organized life, generally when I can, I don't build space. I didn't used to build space for pause in my calendar. So I came up, what I've talked about in my book as well, about this term called pause rituals, which meant I would schedule time in my calendar for pause, engaging in activities that I enjoy, whether it's listening to music, watching a show that feels light, that doesn't feel too heavy. And I would schedule time for it, whether it's 15 minutes to half an hour to 45 minutes. 45 minutes is really a luxury, given, so much is happening on certain days. There's caregiving, all of it. So identify what are your own pause rituals and how are your children building their pause rituals. Is watching, social media pause ritual? Not really. It could be one of the things they do. Your pause rituals should have two qualities. You're monotasking. You're not multitasking. So if I'm going for a walk, I'm not listening to a podcast. So if you're going for a walk and you are listening to my book, it's not a pause ritual. You either read the book or listen to the book or you walk. Do one activity. We are overwhelmed by how much is happening at the end of the day. So your pause ritual should have monotasking. It should have activities that soothe you, that calm you at the end of the day. The next technique, which really, really seems to work, is recognizing, linked to this one, when you're multitasking or task switching. How many of you are talking to your mom, a friend, and scrolling through social media? And many more. Thank you for sharing. There are many people who will tell me it's a topic that comes up almost in every session, in therapy session, where people say, oh, I'm talking to my mom and I'm going through social media on my phone. Or I am talking, something boring is happening at work and I'm going through social media. What drains us, what causes overwhelm, leaves us wired is multitasking. Recognize when do you substitute it with monotasking. And the last one, and then I leave the space open for everyone to ask more questions. When we struggle with anxiety, when we have not done something, or when we put anxiety and perfectionism are best friends. So for everyone who struggles with anxiety, or a lot of people who struggle, also want things to happen with effortless perfection. Effortless perfection is a myth. Even perfection is a myth. It doesn't happen. There's always a time you would feel you're not doing things well. We also tell ourselves, oh, I should have addressed this before. I should have attended to this before. And learning how to be kind to yourself, no matter whether you're 10, whether you are 25, whether you're 80, is one of the biggest superpowers. Research proves that about 75 to 80% of the folks are kinder to everyone else, but they are not kind to themselves. So self-compassion actually means, how do I treat myself with warmth, affection, with tenderness, and with generosity, the way I treat others at the end of the day. So learning when to be compassionate, and we can be compassionate to ourselves and also accountable. It doesn't go, it's not that when you're being Clients often tell me, am I being selfish, complacent when I'm being kind? You can be accountable. At the same time, you can be kind to yourself. And I know I said last, but I think one of the things I forgot, which has helped me massively and also works for a lot of folks, is meditation. Although in the midst of a panic attack, deep breathing, meditation, both don't work. Both will not work. If you deep breathe, if you are meditating, you will become hyper vigilant. So that's not something you are anyways too aware of what's happening in your body. But if you have low to moderate anxiety, meditation can help you center yourself. I was at a meditation camp just 5 months back, and there were monks training us to meditate in that camp. The monk would say, I am putting a timer for 1 minute, just meditate for 1 minute. So for everyone who feels, oh, I can't meditate, my mind doesn't stay in one place, mind is not supposed to stay in one place. The way our mind is designed, we will keep having thought. If you can't meditate, begin with 1 minute, 2 minutes, and increase your capacity. Don't judge yourself if you can't, meditate. And yes, I'll pause at that, and I'll leave the floor for questions then. Thank you, everyone, for listening. Any questions? Then we can start taking that.
Hi, Sonali. I wanted to know how I can explain my anxiety to people in my life. There are people who don't get it when I'm explaining. I'm worrying about all these things. I'm worrying about 10 different things. And like my partner will say, just don't worry about it. Or he doesn't understand why I'm going off into the deep end.
Thank you for asking that beautiful question. It's one of the most common things I'll hear. Don't worry about it and be calm. Nothing happens. It aggravates your anxiety and makes you angry. So if someone around you is struggling with anxiety, the worst thing you can do is to say, be calm. It doesn't work that way. I think what really helps is, if you think you can tell them about how, while you understand all of it, sometimes logically that the worst case is not going to happen, it still is playing in your head. And by just thinking that it will go away, it doesn't go away for you. So one is that. The second is, if there is a podcast that you have listened to, a book you have read that you have really liked, to make your partner read a part of it or listen to a part of it, because very often when we say read this book or listen to this, often people don't invest that much time, but to say let's do it together. The third is to pick an example of saying, here is this scenario, tell me how would you respond and how do I respond, and also talk about how you don't feel in control. While you're trying to work at it, it's not something that you can. And I think it also helps, this is a part I didn't speak about, anxiety can be genetic. Also, anxiety can be very contagious. So if you as a parent struggle with anxiety, you can rub it off on your child. Or even if I am anxious, I can rub it off on another adult at the end of the day. Also, if you grew up around parents who were anxious, you may have learned to get anxious. I remember a client of mine telling me that, that their mom would constantly double check on everything. Doors were checked 5 times. If they are going on a flight, they would check the ticket 4-5 times. They said it's just become a habit for all of us now, and we didn't even realize it's anxiety. The next one is to also know when, and to also tell, if there's a history of trauma, abuse, any of that, sometimes anxiety comes with it. So also to identify maybe what has led to your anxiety or your temperament as well. So, people who are perceptive, people who sometimes are aware of what's happening in their body also become aware of what it feels like in their body. So to talk to your partner also about, or to a friend about who's not understanding where and what's leading to the anxiety, and also tell them what works and what doesn't work.
Hi.
Hi.
Was curious on also figuring out as a parent how to help kids with not exactly anxiety, but maybe a bit of low self-confidence in a few cases or peer pressure. Like I've noticed few kids where they are capable, they do show skills in particular situations, be it in a class, be it on sports, or be it in multiple other places, but they feel a lot of pressure coming out and doing it in a public setting. be it judgment from the teachers, other parents, or coaches, or whatever it is, right? So, as parents, how could we help there?
Yes, thank you for that. So I think what you talked about, and also because of social media, there is downward social comparison where kids are always comparing them to someone else. Or also when we are appreciating our kids in the context of saying how well they are doing rather than the effort they are putting in. So one of the ways, kids who have heard consistently saying, oh, you're so intelligent, you get things so well, these kids don't do well as adults. So in therapy, these kids show up saying, I was told I'm so intelligent, I'm always good at things, and now life as an adult feels really hard. I have to, no matter how much I do, I have to keep putting in more effort. For all of us who are adults, adulting is hard. Does it ever get easier? Yeah, but it continues to remain hard. It never reaches a point where you know that you have an answer for everything. Appreciate children for the effort they are putting rather than saying, oh, you are so intelligent, you are the best, because that can, that can be confusing for a child. Secondly, children do well in school, in colleges, in setups where they are seen, heard, and understood for who they are. One of the biggest needs for children is to be seen, heard for who they are. Letting them free flow talk rather than saying, Angela was doing the session yesterday, which I loved, where she's talking about books. And one of the beautiful things, which when Angela was talking, I realized also that a lot of time we ask our children, right, what did you learn from the book? You don't need to do that. You just need to let children be. When we are turning everything into an exercise, what did you learn? What did you get best out of? Or now that you're so good at writing, why don't you start writing? And, so many people will say, oh, I want my 5-year-old to write a book, 7, 8-year-old. Focus on the values you want to communicate to your child. Children who come with values which feel solid, that's the biggest antidote to anxiety. A value about you are bigger than your work, you are bigger than what you do, your value is about how good you are as a human being. And children who learn, one of the things which really I think is anchoring is we are living in a world which is so uncertain. And I often tell myself, nobody really gets up in the morning thinking today they will make Sonali's life hard. So teaching your children trust. Nobody, I will get irritated by enough things, but nobody is really out there to make my life hard. Teaching your children about trust, teaching them about sense of wonder, teaching them about, teaching them when to grit, when to quit. I am a believer that resilience is about learning when to grit, when to quit. So everybody who says you should continue gritting, I'm not sure. I feel it's a recipe for anxiety. We realistically work towards it. Yes, thank you.
I just want to know if vulnerability is something good between a parent and child. Interpersonal, I think it really builds a lot of trust. But with parent, at what age can you start showing your vulnerability, your fallibility? Which,
you mean as a parent or
as a parent, like, I have also done mistakes and I've gone through the same thing. When is a good age to start building that?
It's a beautiful question. It's always a good age. You just choose age-appropriate stories. When they are at 4, 5, you talk about smaller bits. As they get older, you talk about bigger things in the context of vulnerability. So if there's one thing which everybody should be doing, if you have kids who are teenagers, they should know your stories of failure. They should know that you have failed in life. You have not done well on things. They should know that at one stage you really struggled to speak to others if you did. I grew up with a parent who was in and out of hospital for 25 years. So ever since I was 8, my father was in and out of hospital. He passed away when I was 33. But I had massive anxiety and I had withdrawn and I would barely speak. And I remember when my daughter was about 10, 12 and once struggling with going out and speaking. And I go out and I speak, fairly at functions. She said, but you do it all the time. It comes so easily to you. How can you understand? I was like, I till 26 didn't speak. I was the quietest kid in the class. Nobody heard my voice. And to her, it was massive relief, I'm sure, because not somehow, but our kids have not seen us when we have struggled sometimes. Of course, when there is grief or when my dad passed away, my daughter did see, but these moments were not seen. And just telling her that I used to have massive anxiety, not just brought us closer, but it felt okay that she was feeling nervous and she didn't need to worry too much about it. So vulnerability is good at every stage. Just make it age appropriate. Also, we don't make vulnerability about us. We bring it back to the child. It's always about the child. It's not about us. You tell the story, know when to end the story. Don't make it about you and your achievement. That doesn't work well.
Do you have any like particular person who you're inspired by, or is like you just wanted to create books about this topic?
Thank you for this. So when, I'm inspired by many, many people. And when I was about 8, when my father was in the hospital, I felt there was no one I could talk about what he was going through. For me at least, and I'm sure people have had other experiences, hospitals didn't feel a safe space where I could talk about what was happening to me. So the reason to become a therapist was to build a space where people can talk about it. Also, as a therapist, one can do very limited work. And, the fact that a book has a life longer than the work you do. And my mom would often say, so my dad through his illness, and my mom would often say, if the work you do reaches one person, if what you write, one person reads it and feels good, it's more than enough. And otherwise, to be in a room like this, and even in this moment, to hear you talk so openly, ask so confidently, inspires me. So thank you so much for this.
Thank you, Sonali.
Yeah, hi.
Two situations where I seek your advice. One is when a kid is too frustrated trying to do something but is failing time and again.
How old is the child?
5 years, and she's trying hula hoop, fails every time.
She's trying to?
Do hula hoop, fails
okay.
every time.
And
And there's a lot of frustration that shows after that. And the second is a situation where a kid hits the parent. And it could be a boxing stance, it could be a kick or whatever. I don't know what is the next advisable action. So over to you.
So, there are a lot of things kids will try and do, either not be able to do or not enjoy doing. So, if your kids are older, you have made them try badminton, ballet, karate, and there are many things they have dropped out of or they have not liked it. So, the idea is to focus on the effort, still give it a break. If the child is feeling frustrated, to tell them to pause, teach them self-soothing, what works for self-soothing. If the child has I don't know the full context, but if child has narratives around, I should get it right the first time, none of us get it right the first time. If you have tried riding a cycle, all of us have fallen many times, some of us who gave up figured that we didn't try, we shouldn't be falling so much. Like I gave up as a child. I think I just kept thinking I shouldn't be falling so much. And my anxiety got in the way and I never learned it. So to be able to pause and to be able to also, what someone asked, to be able to talk about your own vulnerability and say, let both of us do together, or what did I struggle with. Even if your child is 5 or older and if they are, hitting you, I think instead of you reacting and hitting back is problematic, you shouting, shrieking, nobody listens when we are shouting, shrieking. People shut down when we are shouting, shrieking. What helps is to be able to give the child a hug, to be able to soothe the child. I would wonder what's leading the child to hit, what are they feeling in their body? And then to be able to set a boundary where you say that this is a strict no. Just like when you're crossing the road or when there is a road to be crossed, child cannot leave your hand. Right? You establish strict no's. And if it's hard to say it, use books that work around it, that help to set those boundaries. And also say that the same no also applies to somebody else hitting them. So make it a larger value-based conversation.
Thank you for this wonderful session, and thank you to all of the audience for asking marvelous questions.